The Gates of Angola. Smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment if you're ready to step inside a place most people never return from. Because once these gates close behind you, Angola Prison doesn't let go. The sirens were already fading when the police cruiser rolled to a stop on the shoulder of Highway 61. Red and blue lights washed over the sugarcane fields like a warning flare. Somewhere in the darkness, the Mississippi River moved silently, indifferent to the crime scene unfolding beside it. A man lay face down in the dirt, hands cuffed behind his back, breath ragged, body shaking, not from fear of arrest, but from the realization of where this road was about to lead him. Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola. Every cop on that highway knew what Angola meant. It wasn't just a prison. It was a destination, a final stop, a place so vast and isolated it had once been a plantation, and in many ways still felt like one. 18,000 acres of land, surrounded on three sides by water, cut off from the outside world. If you were sent there, especially for life, the odds were overwhelming that you would die behind its fences. The man in the dirt would later be labeled Inmate 10 in a sealed transfer document. But before Angola stripped him of his name, he had been someone else, a figure whispered about in police briefings, courtrooms, and neighborhood rumors. His arrest was the result of a months-long manhunt tied to a string of murders that had left entire communities frozen in fear. The trial would be fast, the sentence inevitable, life without parole. Angola. At dawn, a transport bus rolled through the prison's main gate. Razor wire glistened in the early light, stretching endlessly in every direction. Guard towers stood like sentinels, rifles resting casually against their shoulders. The bus didn't slow down. It didn't need to. No one was escaping this place. Inside, the air felt heavier, as if the land itself remembered what it had once been. Angola was built on the remains of a former slave plantation, named after the African country many enslaved people had been taken from. That history wasn't buried. It lived on in the soil, the buildings, and the unspoken rules that governed life inside the walls. This wasn't a prison that focused on rehabilitation. Angola was designed for containment, control, survival. And inside, it lived some of the most dangerous prisoners in America. They weren't all famous. Some had never made headlines. Others had once been household names, their crimes dissected endlessly by the media before the world moved on. But within Angola, reputation mattered more than records. Violence wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, calculated, and far more deadly. The guards knew this better than anyone. Officer Raymond LeBlanc had worked Angola for 23 years. He'd seen men arrive strong and confident, only to wither into shadows within months. He'd also seen something worse, men who adapted, men who learned the rhythm of the place, men who didn't just survive Angola, but thrived in it. They're not afraid, LeBlanc once said quietly during an internal interview. That's what scares you. The ones who aren't afraid of dying in here. Among the incoming transfers that week were 10 names flagged in red ink, 10 inmates classified as extreme risk, 10 men whose presence alone shifted the balance inside their cell blocks. One was a former gang enforcer whose trial transcripts described execution-style killings carried out with chilling efficiency. Another had led a prison riot years earlier at a different facility, leaving guards hospitalized and inmates dead. One was rumored to have ordered murders from behind bars long before Angola became his permanent address. These men weren't housed together by accident. Prison officials believed proximity allowed control, keep the worst of the worst under constant observation. But others feared it did the opposite. It created legends. Inside Cell Block C, whispers traveled faster than any official memo. Inmates leaned close during chow, exchanging fragments of information like contraband currency. Did you hear who came in last night? They say he ran a crew on the outside. Real quiet type. I heard he killed 3 people and never said a word about it. Truth didn't matter as much as perception. In Angola, reputation could protect you or make you a target. One of the 10 had already started to build his myth. He arrived without incident. No outburst. No resistance. Just a steady gaze and a calmness that unsettled everyone who crossed his path. Guards noticed it immediately. So did the inmates. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make demands. He watched. In Angola, watching was never passive. It was survival. The first test came sooner than expected. 3 days after the transfers arrived, a guard conducting count found blood smeared along the concrete floor of a shower area. No body. No witnesses willing to talk. Surveillance cameras had malfunctioned. Not unusual in a facility this old, but suspicious all the same. By morning, rumors had already filled the gaps. Someone had crossed an invisible line. Someone had been punished. The administration downplayed it. Minor altercation, the report said. But seasoned officers knew better. Violence in Angola was rarely spontaneous. It was planned, measured, sent as a message. And the message was clear. The balance of power was shifting. One of the 10 was responsible, or at least connected. The question was which one. As weeks passed, patterns began to emerge. Certain inmates stopped showing up to work details. Others requested protective custody without explanation. The guards noticed subtle changes too, fewer confrontations, but more tension. It was the kind of calm that came before something catastrophic. Angola had seen this before. In the 1990s, the prison had been labeled one of the most violent in the country. Murders were frequent. Stabbings almost routine. Reform efforts had reduced the numbers, but the core truth remained. Angola was built to hold men with nothing left to lose. And nothing made a man more dangerous than the certainty that he would never leave. One night, long after lights out, an emergency call crackled over the radio. A guard down. Cell Block C. By the time backup arrived, the corridor was silent. Too silent. Officer LeBlanc found his colleague sitting against the wall, bleeding but alive, eyes wide with shock. He didn't even run, the guard whispered. He just stood there, like he wanted us to know something. No weapon was recovered. No suspect officially named. But by morning, everyone inside Angola knew. One of the 10 had crossed a line, not just among inmates, but against the system itself. Administrators convened an emergency meeting. Transfers were reconsidered. Lockdowns extended. But Angola didn't bend easily. The prison had its own logic, its own hierarchy, and it didn't always align with official authority. The 10 most dangerous prisoners inside Angola weren't just inmates anymore. They were symbols. And one of them was about to become something else entirely, a figure whose influence would stretch far beyond his cell, shaping violence, loyalty, and fear in ways no one saw coming. Because when investigators finally opened a sealed storage room beneath an old administration building weeks later, what they found inside forced everyone to confront a terrifying possibility. Angola hadn't brought these men together to control them. It may have created something far worse. And that was only the beginning. The kingdom behind the fence. Angola didn't explode after the guard was attacked. It tightened. The administration imposed extended lockdowns, cut recreation hours, and increased random cell searches. Radios crackled constantly. Boots echoed louder in the corridors. From the outside, it looked like control had been restored. From the inside, everyone knew the truth. Power in Angola had shifted, and it was consolidating. Cell Block C became the center of gravity. Inmates stopped speaking freely there, even in whispers. Conversations ended when certain figures walked past. Some men who had once been loud and aggressive suddenly kept their eyes down. Others aligned themselves quietly, offering favors, protection, loyalty. In Angola, alliances were never declared. They were felt. The man known in the transfer file as Inmate 10 had become something else entirely. No tattoos marked his rank. No public displays of dominance announced his authority. He didn't need them. His reputation traveled ahead of him, carried by fear and careful observation. Guards noticed that when tensions rose, violence didn't. Instead, incidents happened elsewhere, timed, precise, almost surgical. A contraband phone discovered in one block. A fight breaking out between 2 unrelated inmates. A work detail suddenly requesting reassignment. It was distraction by design. Officer LeBlanc started keeping a private notebook. He had learned long ago that official reports rarely captured the truth of Angola. Patterns did. He noted that every disruption coincided with inmate 10's movement, a change in work assignment, a brief transfer to medical, an unexpected meeting with prison clergy. It was subtle, but LeBlanc trusted experience over coincidence. Inside the prison, rumors hardened into belief. They said inmate 10 had organized crews on the outside, using family members and coded letters. They said he could have people hurt without ever leaving his cell. Some claimed he was planning something bigger, not an escape, but something far more dangerous. Control. Angola wasn't run by gangs in the traditional sense. It was too big, too monitored, too brutal. Power shifted through influence, not numbers. And influence came from knowing when to act, and when not to. One of the other 9 learned that lesson too late. He had arrived boasting about his past, reminding anyone who would listen that he'd once run entire neighborhoods. Inside Angola, that kind of noise was an invitation. The incident happened in broad daylight during a supervised work detail. No witnesses officially came forward. Surveillance footage showed nothing more than a brief scuffle near a storage shed. By the time guards reached the scene, the man was unconscious, his injuries severe but carefully controlled. He lived. That was the message. Medical staff treated him under guard. When he returned to his cell days later, he refused eye contact with anyone. Within a week, he requested protective custody, a move seen by many as surrender. The hierarchy was now unmistakable. Administrators escalated their response. Intelligence units reviewed mail, monitored phone calls, and analyzed movement logs. What they found unsettled them. There were no clear orders, no obvious chains of command. Everything flowed through suggestion, implication, reputation. That made it impossible to dismantle. Meanwhile, Angola's past seemed to echo louder than ever. The prison's history as a plantation had always lingered beneath the surface, but now it felt alive. Men labored in fields under the same sun, watched by armed guards from horseback. Some inmates joked bitterly that the only thing that had changed was the paperwork. In this environment, legends were inevitable. One story spread faster than the rest. It claimed that inmate 10 had intervened to stop a killing, not out of mercy, but strategy. A dead man attracted attention. A controlled situation created loyalty. Whether it was true didn't matter. Belief was power. Even the guards weren't immune. A young officer requested reassignment after receiving a message slipped under his door at home. Not a threat, just a warning. It mentioned his commute, his routine, details no inmate should have known. Internal Affairs investigated and found nothing concrete. The officer transferred anyway. Fear had crossed the fence. Behind the scenes, investigators reopened old cases tied to several of the 10. They discovered patterns that had been missed years earlier, connections between crimes that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. It raised an unsettling question. What if Angola wasn't containing dangerous men? What if it was concentrating them? As pressure mounted, prison officials approved a rare measure, separating 2 of the 10 and transferring 1 to a different unit. The move was executed quietly, without announcement. It failed. Within 48 hours, tension spiked across 3 cell blocks. Fights broke out. Equipment was sabotaged. 1 inmate overdosed under suspicious circumstances. Nothing could be directly traced back to a single source, but the message was unmistakable. Separation was unacceptable. The inmate was returned. That was the moment administrators realized they were no longer fully in control of Angola's internal order. The prison still functioned. Rules were enforced, but authority had become negotiated, invisible, fragile, and dangerous. Officer LeBlanc wrote one final line in his notebook that week. Power here doesn't come from bars or guns. It comes from inevitability. For the men serving life without parole, inevitability was everything. They had no release dates, no leverage from the outside world. What they had instead was time, endless time, to adapt, influence, and reshape their environment. And someone was using that time very effectively. Late one night, during a routine audit, investigators uncovered something they hadn't been looking for: a series of coded references in old inmate correspondence, dating back years, linking several of the 10 long before they arrived at Angola. They hadn't just met here. They had been moving toward this place, toward each other. The realization hit hard and fast. Angola wasn't the beginning of this story. It was the convergence point. And if that was true, then whatever was coming next had been planned long before the gates ever closed. Because the most dangerous prisoners inside Angola weren't improvising anymore. They were executing something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The prison that answered back. By the time federal investigators stepped onto Angola's grounds, the prison already knew they were coming. Not through leaks or hacked communications, but through instinct. Angola had developed its own nervous system over decades, a web of glances, routines, and silences that transmitted information faster than any radio. When unfamiliar vehicles rolled past the main gate, inmates noticed. When guard rotations shifted slightly out of pattern, they felt it. When administrators suddenly stopped pretending everything was normal, the prison responded. Inside, cell block C went quiet. No arguments. No laughter. No sudden movements. Men stayed in their bunks longer than usual, eyes fixed on walls stained by time. Even hardened inmates sensed that something decisive had begun. Whatever balance existed inside Angola was being tested, and history had taught them that balance never broke gently. The investigators weren't chasing a single crime anymore. They were chasing a structure. Years of incidents, assaults, contraband networks, unexplained transfers, coordinated disruptions, were finally being viewed as one continuous story. What had once looked like chaos now revealed design. Angola hadn't been overwhelmed by violence. It had been stabilized by it, controlled and rationed like currency. At the center of that realization sat the 10 names. Each man represented a different kind of threat. Some were notorious for brutality, others for intelligence. A few had inspired loyalty, so intense it bordered on devotion. But only one had managed to connect them without ever being publicly visible. Inmate 10. The decision to isolate him was made quietly and without debate. Officials knew they had only one chance to do it right. If the move failed, the fallout could destabilize the entire prison. At 3:17 a.m., during a routine count, a specialized team entered cell block C. No sirens, no announcements, just controlled movement and rehearsed precision. Inmate 10 was removed from his cell and transferred to a reinforced isolation unit deep within the facility, a place designed to sever communication entirely. For the first time since his arrival, Inmate 10 vanished from Angola's internal world. The prison held its breath. For several hours, nothing happened. Then the ripple began. A kitchen supervisor discovered inventory discrepancies too large to ignore. An inmate collapsed during morning labor, later confirmed to be suffering from deliberate poisoning, non-lethal, but unmistakably intentional. A fire alarm malfunctioned in a separate unit, forcing a partial evacuation. None of it was catastrophic. All of it was coordinated. Investigators realized too late that Inmate 10's removal hadn't cut the head off the operation. It had triggered the next phase. The truth emerged slowly, pieced together through intercepted letters, inmate interviews, and one crucial confession from a man who had already accepted he would never leave Angola alive. Inmate 10 hadn't ruled alone. He had been a stabilizer. For years, he had prevented unnecessary violence, brokered ceasefires, and controlled retaliation. His influence wasn't about domination. It was about restraint. The prison had mistaken calm for compliance. Without him, old rivalries resurfaced. Power vacuums formed instantly. Men who had waited patiently for years saw their opportunity. Angola began to fracture. Guards increased their presence, but force only accelerated the breakdown. Each lockdown created resentment. Each search bred paranoia. The system responded with pressure, and pressure produced cracks. Then came the incident that would define Angola's modern history. During a midday work detail near the old agricultural fields, a guard collapsed. The initial report cited heat exhaustion. Within minutes, it was clear that wasn't true. The man had been injected with a substance that caused temporary paralysis, not fatal, but terrifyingly precise. The message was unmistakable. We can reach anyone. Panic spread faster than any riot ever could. Guards began calling in sick. Supervisors requested transfers. The prison's outer structure remained intact, but inside, trust was eroding. Federal authorities now faced an impossible choice: restore inmate 10's influence and risk admitting loss of control, or attempt to dismantle the network entirely and risk open war. They chose dismantlement. One by one, the remaining 9 were isolated, transferred, or placed under extreme monitoring. Communication channels were severed. Entire blocks were shut down. Angola transformed into a prison inside a prison. For weeks, the tension was unbearable. Then, slowly, the violence stopped. Not because peace had returned, but because exhaustion had set in. Men realized the system they'd relied on was gone. The rules had changed. Survival once again meant invisibility. The legends began to fade, replaced by caution. Inmate 10, still isolated, was interviewed under strict supervision. He spoke calmly, without anger or defiance. He denied ordering violence. He didn't deny influence. Angola needs order, he said. If you remove the people who create it, don't be surprised when chaos fills the space. The investigators left the interview shaken. Months later, Angola stabilized. Officially, the threat was neutralized. Reports praised reforms, new protocols, enhanced oversight. On paper, the prison was safer than it had been in years. But Angola remembered. Stories circulated quietly among inmates and guards alike about the time when 10 men held an entire institution in balance. About how control didn't always come from brutality, but from understanding human behavior at its worst. And about inmate 10, the man who never led openly, never demanded loyalty, and yet reshaped Angola simply by existing within it. Years later, when a new inmate arrived and asked why certain unwritten rules were followed so strictly, an older prisoner answered softly, "Because we've seen what happens when order disappears." Angola still stands. The gates still close. The fields are still worked under the same unforgiving sun. But beneath the surface, the prison carries the memory of a truth few institutions ever acknowledge. The most dangerous prisoners are not always the ones who kill. Sometimes they're the ones who understand how power really works, and how close it always is to slipping away. And if you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.